A new look, an updated format for our airshow review programmes developed as we start to serialise these films just in time for the last episode of the 2018 season, but only a few weeks before the start of the next one. Welcome to the first ever edition of the Midlands Air Festival, the only new overland airshow in the UK in 2018. Set in the expansive grounds of the Ragley Hall estate, the Midlands Air Festival is a combination of traditional air displays, night shows and balloon launches. So let's take a look at the lineup and running order. 7 minutes into the programme, look out particularly for the UK debut of P-47D Thunderbolt Nellie. Then we get up close with the Westland Wasp, a delightful display by the Stampe Formation Flying Team, some heavier aircraft end the show, Catalina, Mustang and a pair of Bristol Blenheim and Supermarine Spitfire. Now, I alluded earlier to the fact that this is more than just a traditional airshow, and that is very true. The event actually began on Friday night with a Nightfire show which featured dusk air displays, followed by a balloon night glow and a firework display. So before we get into the bulk of the weekend flying programme, let's take a look back at the best of the Nightfire action. And kicking off our review of Nightfire are several aircraft we'll see in full later on. Peter Davis in his Rotor Sport Calidus Autogyro, followed by an extremely graceful performance by Bob Grimstad in his Fournier RF4D. Then we move into a trio of pyro shows, starting with the Silence SA-180 Twister, then Brendan O'Brien flying a Schweizer 300 he calls Otto the Helicopter. And finally, two Grob 109s of airborne pyrotechnics. And just time for a quick look at the balloon night glow now, which was an awful lot of fun, I must say. The bursts of flame from the balloons synchronised to music. But back now to the weekend programme, and we start our recap of the main flying display with the Turbulent Team. The Turb Team are part of the very well-established Tiger Club, an aviation sports club which has given wings to many of the great airshow performers on the UK circuit today, including several here at the Midlands Air Festival, Brendan O'Brien and Bob Grimstad, for instance. The club's been around since 1957, the display team since 1959, which makes them not just one of the oldest civilian airshow teams in the world, but one of the oldest airshow teams full stop. The display is not one of conventional flying, but one of barnstorming, so flower bombing as you see here, balloon popping and the like. In this case though, it was harder for the pilots than usual, as there was a 300-foot altitude minima at the show due to trees near the aerobatic box. And that's usually around the highest that the Turb Team go, which does make flower bombing rather tricky. And of course, it also precluded the limbo act as well, which by its very nature takes place right down at ground level. Here's an aircraft we saw briefly earlier, the Rotor Sport Calidus Autogyro. You may be surprised if you're not familiar with the concept of autogyros to hear the main rotor is completely unpowered. The principle is similar to that of a sycamore leaf, so the aircraft flies along, the force of the air passing through the main rotor causes it to turn, and that in turn generates lift. Forward thrust is generated by a 115 horsepower Rotax engine driving a small propeller at the rear of the fuselage. The result of this design is extremely low weight and also the capability to fly at very low speed, so the Calidus can cruise quite comfortably at 100 miles an hour and also decelerate to just 20 miles an hour.
Look at this hook landing. Absolutely incredible. Lands it in absolutely nothing flat. Ladies and gentlemen, what a magnificent display there. Pete Davies.
Here's Lauren Wilson flying a Pitts S1S. But this isn't a stock Pitts, it's been strengthened and fitted with larger control surfaces, so this aeroplane can go well beyond the original design limitations. Its Lycoming IO360 engine produces 180 horsepower, and when you consider that's only around half of what is produced by modern aerobatic aircraft like the Su-31 or the Edge 540, it makes this kind of flying mightily impressive.
Here she comes now, low level. Beautiful.
Now this display is quite special, and one we didn't think we'd get to see on the airshow circuit as soon as we did. This was P-47D Thunderbolt, no guts, no glory, an aircraft very familiar to the UK airshow circuit from 1986 until 2007 when it was shipped to the United States. However, a matter of weeks before the Midlands Air Festival, it came back to the UK. It's now known as Nellie, an aircraft of the 48th Fighter Group of the US Army Air Force, and made its UK display debut here at the Midlands Air Festival. The P-47 was introduced in 1942, and it is the largest and heaviest piston engine fighter in history. It weighs in at 7 tons, which makes it even heavier than the twin-engine Bristol Blenheim we'll see later. Little wonder, therefore, it needed an 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine, putting out around 2,000 horsepower. A change of pace now with a Westland Wasp HAS Mark I of Terry Martin.
The Falklands campaign.
I like the Wasp. I was elected for looking pictures of things in more Falklands.
This was primarily a naval helicopter designed to operate from frigates, hence it has a folding tail and folding rotor blades. Thanks to altitude restrictions, the display itself may be rather high, but you are about to get a very close-up look at the Wasp as we take our cameras within just a few feet of its landing spot. So enjoy this. Perhaps one of the most graceful displays of the day now as Bob Grimstad takes centre stage with his Fournier RF4D motor glider. This wood and fabric aeroplane is fitted with a similar engine to the Turbulent we saw earlier, this time producing 39 horsepower, but don't let that deceive you. This is a surprisingly aerobatic aeroplane capable of pulling up to 11 G.
Bob Grimstad. You can see he's waving out of the cockpit. Give him a huge wave.
The first flight of the RF-4 was only around a year before that of the BAC Strikemaster. Yet, it's hard to imagine a more dramatic contrast. 39 horsepower to more than 3,000 pounds of thrust as the sound of a Rolls-Royce Viper turbojet fills the air.
Also went to the air forces of Ecuador, Oman and Yemen. They've used their Strikemasters in combat.
That's a really really looking plane.
It actually is a very, very effective use by Oman and Yemen and
This light combat aircraft, developed in the UK for the export market, used to be a far more common sight at UK air shows. Indeed, there used to be a team, Team Viper, who flew a formation display with 4 of them less than 10 years ago. But now I'm delighted to say this team took on a second Strikemaster during the 2018 season. And now there is a formation jet aerobatic team flying the Strikemaster in the UK once again.
in the 1970s.
And this was one of my favourite displays of the day, the Stompe Formation Flying Team. The Stomp first flew in 1933, but despite orders for almost 1,000 aircraft from the French and Belgian air forces, only 35 had been produced when the outbreak of war forced production to end in 1939. One aircraft survived the war by flying to England in 1941, and then, after the conflict ended, a further 940 were produced, both by the original manufacturers and under licence.
The lead aircraft is flying the entire formation there. His wingmen have just picked up spots on his aircraft, and they are sticking like glue, as they said in the Battle of Britain. Very appropriate for today.
Like the Fournier, these are much more aerobatic than they look. You can even flick roll a Stomp, and the Stompe Formation Flying Team show off the aircraft exceptionally well. I only regret that I can't show you Chris Jesson's solo display, which ended the routine. It was a truly sublime display and absolutely wonderful to watch. But sadly, YouTube copyright rules prevent me from showing it to you.
We'll let you listen to it as it flies through.
Now this aeroplane is being flown by someone you might have seen on television. Matt Dearden was one of the pilots flying for Suzy Air in the Channel 4 series Worst Place to Be a Pilot, but he's now back in the UK and flying this wonderful PBY-5A Catalina in his spare time. The Catalina first flew in 1935 and saw service in the US, Canada and the UK. This particular example served with the Royal Canadian Air Force on anti-submarine duties before being converted into a firebomber. She's now based at IWM Duxford.
I think the numbers of these aircraft that were operated by the Allies and the Russians. That shot down the first yak.
Another aircraft of American origin, P-51D Mustang The Shark, owned by the Norwegian Spitfire Foundation. Until 2012, this aircraft was known as Old Crow and wore US Army Air Force colours. It's now in the scheme of 112 Squadron Royal Air Force, which operated P-51s in Sicily and southern Italy during World War II. And if you want to buy this aeroplane, it can be yours for only $2.1 million. Two aircraft from the aircraft restoration company end our show. First, the Bristol Blenheim 1F, the fighter variant of this twin-engine bomber design.
The original aircraft was built by Avro and flew with 23 Squadron without the factory.
It will soon be joined by a Spitfire Mark 9 to end what has been an extremely successful first edition of the Midlands Air Festival. We'll be back in May with our first episodes from 2019, but until then, enjoy some Rolls-Royce Merlin magic. From me, Adam Landau, it's goodbye for now.